Good, good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Grau. I am a Senior Advisor at Luxinnovation in the Corporate R&D and Innovation Support Department, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this webinar that will present the law of the 24th of July 2020 aimed at stimulating business investment in the COVID-19 period. This webinar in English is organized jointly by the Ministry of Economy and Luxinnovation, which is the National Innovation Agency. The objective of this law is to stimulate companies that are in financial difficulties due to the current situation to undertake planned investments that might have been cancelled or postponed due to the economic crisis that has been provoked by the COVID-19 pandemic. The webinar will provide you with detailed information on the modalities of the application of the law. You are, of course, welcome to ask questions during the presentation that will follow. We will reply to them during the questions and answers session that will take place at the end. We have almost more or less 70 participants to this webinar. It will probably be difficult for us to answer to all of your questions. We will, of course, do our maximum and answer live as many questions as possible, but there will be a frequent asked questions section that will be published on the website of guichet.lu. It will treat all topics related to the law, regardless of whether they have been tackled today or not. You will also be able to watch the replay of this webinar if you wish. You will receive a link via email just after the end of this session. In addition, the Luxinnovation team is there to help you and to provide you with all information that you might need regarding how to obtain the subsidies offered. Before going into the details of the presentation of the law, I invite you to listen to a welcome message by the Minister of the Economy, Mr. Franz Fayot. Go for the video.
Bienvenue à cette conférence en ligne. Nous vous présentons aujourd'hui un nouveau régime d'aide qui s'inscrit dans le programme Neustart du gouvernement. En stimulant de manière substantielle les investissements dans l'ère du Covid-19, le nouveau régime d'aide permet aux entreprises de rebondir le plus rapidement possible après la crise qu'elles traversent actuellement. 3 types d'aides sont prévus. Une aide à l'investissement en faveur des projets de développement, un soutien à l'investissement pour des projets d'innovation de procédés et d'organisation, et une aide à l'investissement en faveur des projets d'efficacité énergétique ou de dépassement des normes. L'intensité de l'aide varie selon le projet et la taille de l'entreprise. Avec une majoration de 20% sur l'aide accordée, nous allons également encourager les entreprises à développer en particulier des produits et des solutions circulaires. Le Luxembourg devient ainsi le premier pays européen à accorder un tel supplément d'aide pour des projets d'investissement qui respectent les principes de l'économie circulaire. À l'instar d'autres mesures pour soutenir les entreprises, ce nouveau régime d'aide fait ainsi partie de la politique de relance durable de l'économie nationale. La relance sera l'opportunité de repenser notre société et de favoriser un autre modèle qui permette une meilleure résilience économique du pays face à des crises comme celle qu'on vit actuellement. Pour le développement futur, nous devons continuer à prendre en compte les préoccupations en matière de respect de l'environnement, d'utilisation plus efficiente des ressources et de qualité de vie. Je remercie les organisateurs de cette conférence en ligne et vous souhaite à toutes et tous une session intéressante.
Already gave us a very brief overview of the content of the law. We will now go more into detail about the modalities, the eligibility criteria, and the available support for companies. I then invite now Bob Veit from the Ministry of Economy. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning to everyone. The presentation will be divided, as you can see on the slide, into 2 main pillars. The first will go into more the substance of the new aid scheme, and where we try to explain you what the objective of the scheme is, what form the aid actually takes, and what the different eligibility criteria actually are. The second pillar of the presentation will be more on the procedural side, on how to submit an aid, what the timeline is, and of course we will try to give you some concrete examples of projects that can be considered eligible under this new aid scheme. Starting with the objective, as already mentioned by Minister Franz Fayo, the aim of the scheme is to encourage companies that have faced a significant drop in turnover to carry out investments that would have been cancelled or postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not just any investment that we want the companies to undertake, but we want them to invest into strategic projects. So strategic investments that can help them improve their resilience in a new economic environment. What is the form of the new aid foreseen in this scheme? It is a cash grant, so it's non-reimbursable compared to other schemes we have already put in place. It's important to stress that the aid is capped at a maximum amount of 800,000 euros for each single undertaking, so meaning per group. In addition, it is worth stressing that there's a cumulation rule, meaning that we have already other schemes in place, such as the repayable advance scheme or the Fonds de Relance et de Solidarité, and as well the aid scheme for relaunching the retail business. All of these schemes have to be looked at to make sure that the company has not received more than 800,000 euros per group. So, for example, if a company has already received 500,000 euros under the repayable advance scheme, it can only benefit of 300,000 euros maximum under this new scheme. The aid amount is calculated based on an aid intensity that depends on the different projects, but will be basically look at the eligible costs of each investment project. So the final aid amount depends on the eligible cost and on the size of the company and or of course the type of project the undertaking wants to do. Moving on to the eligibility criteria. There are quite a few of them. I'll try to summarize the main eligibility criteria that the companies must be aware of when applying for this new aid scheme. The first being, as already mentioned, a 15% drop in turnover over the month of April, May, and June 2020 compared either to the same period in 2019 or to the average turnover for the year 2019. So that's the first criteria that must be respected. The second criteria that must be respected is the business permit. The company must have a business permit that has been delivered prior to the 18th of March 2020. And any company that is active in the primary production of agricultural products or in the fishery and agricultural sector are not eligible. That being said, if a company, for example, is active in the production of primary agricultural products, in that case, the company may still apply if the activity refers to commercialization or marketing of these goods. Second set of criteria to be eligible. The first relates to the so-called incentive effect. The incentive effect, what do we understand under this notion? It's basically that the company cannot start with its project prior to actually having the green light from the Ministry of Economy. So the company is not allowed to take any legally binding commitment, may that be equipment order or signing any contract or any other commitment that makes the investment irreversible. So once again, and it's very important that the companies wait until the ministry has given a decision before the company actually starts with the implementation of the planned project. In addition, the project must be of a minimum investment. The minimum investment depends on the size of the company, and those being, for example, 20,000 euros for micro and small enterprises, 50,000 euros for medium enterprise, and 250,000 euros for large enterprises. All of that, of course, it's excluding VAT. Moving on to the last set of eligibility criteria, as a common theme is that companies that are considered to be in difficulty are not eligible under normal aid schemes. Here, this criteria is limited to medium and large enterprises who cannot be in difficulty as defined by the European regulation. Micro and small businesses, on the other side, may be considered under difficulty as long as they are not subject to collective insolvency proceedings or have received any rescue or restructuring aid. So it's important that the financial situation of the company is good, otherwise we can't award any aid. Moving on to the group and company size definition. When a company applies for a subsidy, for example, we have to look at the whole group, meaning that we look at the small and medium enterprise definition, so the SME definition that have been defined on the European level, and which is recapitulated here in the table. There are three elements we look at, first being the headcount, second being the turnover, and the last being the balance sheet of the company. For example, the headcount is a knockout criteria, whereas the turnover and balance sheet, only one of them has to be fulfilled. A quick example, imagine a company of 45 people, so a headcount of 45, and a turnover of 9 million, but a balance sheet of 15 million. In this particular case, the company could still be considered as a small undertaking. So it's important to know that we not only look at the size of the aid applicant, but we also look at the group the aid applicant may belong to. In other words, we look at all linked and partner enterprises of the aid applicant. To this end, the company must submit, when applying for an aid, a full legal chart of the group it belongs to, summarizing basically the shareholder links as well as its participation. To give you some concrete examples, imagine company A, in this case, applies for an aid under this new scheme, and it is known that company A is owned by Mrs. A by 60%, Mr. B 25%, and Mrs. C 15%. In addition, we know that none of the shareholders actually own another company or can actually influence the decision in another company which is on the same or adjacent market. And furthermore, we know that the company A does not have any participations in other companies. As a result, we only look at company A to determine the size of the company. In this particular case, we know that the headcount of company A is 18, the turnover is 3.4 million, and the balance sheet is 1.19. As a conclusion, company A would be considered as a small enterprise. Just one last example on how to determine the size of the company. Once again, here, company A is the aid applicant, but this time we do know that Mrs. A, who owns a majority of the shares in company A, also owns a majority in company B, namely 51%. We also know that company A and B are active on the same or adjacent market, and we do know that company B fully owns company C. As a result, to determine the size of company A, in this particular case, we would not only look at the headcount, turnover, and balance sheet of company A, but we would also look at the data from company B and C. Given the big size of company C, company A would have to be considered as a large undertaking under the SME definition. Moving on to the project typology. Basically, or broadly speaking, there are three main categories under which the project could fall. The first being a development project, including the circular economy component. The second being the process and organizational innovation projects. And the third being any energy efficiency projects or projects allowing the company to go beyond environmental standards. Let me explain these three categories in a bit more depth. the first development project. As you can see, there are 3 subcategories of projects we consider to be eligible. The first being an extension of an existing establishment, basically meaning an existing company can increase its output due to the investment. The second being a diversification of its products in addition to its existing products. So if a company wants to diversify and want to offer new products in addition, this type of project would be considered as eligible. And last but not least, any fundamental transformation of the company, of the entire production process or the service provision, would fall under this category and would be eligible for aid. Not all of the costs are eligible. Certain costs are excluded. We've listed some of them here on the slide. The first being the cost for setting up a new company, which is not eligible. The second are the costs related to equipment replacement. So if you're a company that has existing machines and which have come to the economic life, and then in that particular case, if the company wants to replace these machines, such an investment is not eligible. And in the end, any investments, of course, that aim at the company complying with current legislation, regulation, or administrative rules are not eligible. If the company realizes one of the 3 subcategories here mentioned just before, and the company is, the project of the company is in line with the circular economy notion, in that particular case, we can give a special incentive because we could award a higher aid intensity for that particular project. When is a project in line with the circular economy component? As mentioned on the slide, the project must make a substantial contribution to protecting the environment by fulfilling at least one of the following criteria. The first being, it must result in a more efficient use of natural resources. The second being extending the lifetime of products and their reuse. The third being increasing product recyclability. And the fourth being substantially reducing the quantity of substance of very high concern. So basically reducing dangerous substance within a product. And last being avoiding the production of waste altogether. So if the company undertakes a project that is eligible under the development project, as we've just seen, it has a specific or special incentive to analyze its project to make sure that it may fall under circular economy to receive another a higher aid intensity. Moving on to the second category of projects that fall under this new aid scheme, the so-called process and organizational innovation projects. Once again, there's 2 subcategories. The first being process innovation, which basically refers to the implementation of a new or significantly improved production or delivery method. It's worth stressing that this includes significant changes in techniques, equipment, or software, and that any sort of minor change in the way the company operates cannot be considered as eligible. The second subcategory refers to organizational innovation. This refers to, of course, the implementation of a new organizational method in an undertaking's business practice that could be on the workplace organization or on its external relations, may that be with customers or also with its suppliers. It's worth stressing once again that such innovation may also include the promotion of remote working practice within the organization. For this type of project, it's very important to stress that the acquisition of assets, of certain goods, for example, of a software, of computers, are not eligible by itself. we are in the category of an innovation project, so the company must, or the company staff might actually make an effort to implement the project, and there must be innovative component within the business itself. So simply acquiring, for example, a new software is not enough to be eligible under this scheme. Moving on to the last type of projects that can be considered as eligible, namely energy efficiency projects or projects to go beyond environmental standards. Once again, two subcategories, the first being energy efficiency investments. Here, the amount of saved energy is determined by measuring or estimating consumption before and after the implementation of an energy efficiency project. The second subcategory refers to investments allowing to go beyond national environmental standards or to increase the level of environmental protection on unregulated matters. Basically, the government wants to help companies realize investments that allow them to go beyond current norms, current standards, and thus helping the protection of the environment. Here as well, it's worth stressing that any investment that are required to comply with existing regulation or norms or standards are not eligible. Only investments that go beyond are eligible, and investments that are not seeking to comply with current legislation can be co-financed by a state subsidy. Here, a quick recap of the three types of projects that can be considered eligible. Just a quick reminder, once again, the maximum aid amount is 800,000 euros per single undertaking, so per group. The most important information, I guess, for you is here the aid intensity, depending on the size of the company or on the project. As you can see, if a company, or a micro or small company, implements a development project, it can receive up to a 30% aid intensity of its eligible costs. This aid intensity is reduced to 25% for medium and 20% for large undertakings. If, as already mentioned, the company makes sure that its development project falls under the circular economy concept, it can receive a top-up of 20% aid intensity. As a result, the aid intensity would be 50% for micro and small enterprises, 45% for medium, and 40% for large undertakings. When it comes to the process and organizational innovation projects or energy efficiency projects, here the aid intensity is limited at a maximum of 50%, regardless of the size of the company. How to proceed? What are the steps to take if a company decides to actually submit an application? All the application have to be done through the online application on mygischi.lu, where the company first has to set up a business profile, or it can use, if it has so already, its existing one on mygischi.lu. Then it can select the form of Eco-Covid-19 Projet d'investissement ICO, which will then lead the company to the application form. The application form must be filled out by the company, as well as two appendices that that company must upload at the end of the application. The first being on project description. That's where the company has to describe in a bit more detail what the project is all about. And the second being a financial summary of the project. Of course, if the company deems any other document to be relevant, it can attach the document in its application on mygischi.lu. And then last but not least, of course, it has to make sure that the application is sent via mygischi to the Ministry of Economy. Maybe just a tip from our side, it's given that there are two appendices to fill out, we recommend that the company first fills out those appendices, so the project description and the financial summary, before filling out the more straightforward online formula on myguichet.lu. Where can these be found? They can be found on the guichet.lu site and on the myguichet.lu. So please do not hesitate to first start with the appendix when submitting all of your applications. What's the timeline? The timeline can depend on file by file, but we do have certain deadlines. So once a company has decided to submit an aid application but still has some questions, it can either go to the FEDIL, to Chamber of Commerce, or Chambre de Métier, and of course it can also seek support from Ministry of Economy or optional support from Luxinnovation, who has great experience in accompanying the businesses in their aid application, and they can respond to any questions you may have. The first deadline being 1st of December. Any company that wants to benefit from an aid under this scheme must submit its aid application before the 1st of December 2020. It's very important. Thereafter follows the instruction phase. We'll try to treat any application as quickly as possible, but it could be that one application is a bit more straightforward than the others, but we'll do our best to answer you as quickly as possible. That being said, the ministry has an obligation to take a decision by the end of the year. So by the 31st of December, the ministry must have responded to all of the aid applications. Once the ministry the minister has given its green light, has awarded the aid, only thereafter the company can actually start with its project. So it's very important that the company waits with any sort of orders or any binding commitment before actually receiving the decision of the ministry. So once the company has received the decision, the company has a maximum of 2 years to implement the project. If it cannot be realized within 2 years, the project is in theory not eligible. And then once the project is completed, it's only thereafter that the company can apply for an aid transfer. So basically, the company has incurred the real costs, and afterwards it submits the paid bills to the ministry, which we then verify, and based on those bills, we pay you the aid amount. So the usual procedure is at the asking for the aid payment at the end of the project. If, however, specifically for big projects, or if the company may experience some liquidity problems to implement the project, the company can, along the project, submit grant payments requests during the year. These are limited to a maximum of 2 per year, and it's usually done for bigger projects and where there is a risk of liquidity shortage. So before moving on to the FAQ session, I would give you some concrete examples of investments that would actually be considered eligible under this specific scheme. The first being, imagine a company that invests into a new shredder to prepare the raw materials used in its production process. Such an investment would in turn allow the company to increase its production. For this specific case, as you can see, there's no specific circular economy component. This investment, or such an investment, would basically be considered as a simple development project. The second example still refers to a company that invests in a new shredder, enabling it to use locally sourced second-hand raw material in its production process. Here, as you can see, there's an element of circular economy that allows the company not only to increase its output, but also to help protect the environment by respecting the closed circuits by basically using locally sourced second-hand raw material. As you can imagine, this specific project would not only fall on a development project, but would also benefit from a top-up of aid intensity due to the circular economy bonus. Just a quick other example on the circular economy. For this specific case, imagine the company establishes a PaaS, so a product as a service. In this particular case, it would be a model for construction elements, for example, cobblestones that will be taken back after use, cleaned, and repurposed. To this end, the company would have to invest in a machine to inspect and clean the cobblestones, and upon their return to the factory, it would also have to have a new crusher for the broken elements. As you can imagine, in this particular case, where the company makes a reuse of existing products and repurposes them, the circular economy component is here given. And as a result, the company would not only receive aid on a development project, but would also benefit from the circular economy bonus. The fourth example refers to a company that wants to set up a digital platform to sell tailor-made products. Instead of sending a technician on site to take the measures, the client will be able to introduce those measures itself through an online platform. So the company becomes more efficient and doesn't have to send a technician out and do all the journey to the client. As you can imagine, this falls under a process innovation project and helps the company to become more efficient and in relation to its clients. The last example refers to a company that already complies with the existing emission ceiling regulations, but wants to invest in a new gas treatment unit, enabling it to further lower its polluting emission levels. As you can imagine, once again, such a project where the company invests in something that goes beyond the existing environmental standards would be co-financed by this new aid scheme. So these were 5 concrete examples for the different types of projects that can be considered as eligible. If you have a question, and as Barbara already mentioned, if you have a question, do not hesitate to contact your federation, may that be FEDIL, Chamber of Commerce, Chambre Métier, but you can also contact the Ministry of Economy under the indicated email address invest.covid19@eco.etat.lu, or Luxinnovation, who has a great experience in helping the companies submit an aid application here, and we'll try to do our best to answer all of your questions. That being said, I'll give the floor back to Barbara. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob, for this very clear and detailed presentation. It will be very soon available on the Luxinnovation's website, www.luxinnovation.lu. I would also like to mention once again that Luxinnovation team is there to provide you with further information on how to apply for these subsidies. So if you ever have a question, just drop us an email or give us a call. We are here to help you. We are now going to move to the questions and answers session. As you have seen, the law of the 24th of July includes 3 different investment aids. 1 for the development projects, 1 for the process and organizational innovation projects, and 1 investment aid for energy efficiency projects or projects going beyond environmental standards. We will therefore split the Q&A session in 4 parts, and each one of them will last between 5 and 7 minutes, more or less. The first part will focus on general considerations, and the other 3 will focus on each one of the 3 topics covered by the law. So we start now with the questions and answers, and we're going to start with general criteria, and it will be Bob Veit who will be answering these questions. So I see here that the first question that we received regarding this general aspect is, for example, this one. Can companies that have already requested financial support for short-time work apply for this subsidy? And is the calculation of eligible costs impacted?
Thank you, Barbara. Indeed, if a company has already benefited from the subsidies foreseen by the short-term working scheme, or is still continuing to benefit from those subsidies, it is still eligible under this scheme. The only factor that one must take into consideration is the fact that if the company has certain employees in short-term working, and at the same time it submits these employees as eligible costs, for example, under the procedural or organizational innovation, then these cannot be considered as eligible. But if a company still receives benefits from the short-term working scheme, it is, of course, eligible under this new scheme. I've seen there have also been quite a few questions on how to calculate the 15% drop in turnover. The first answer or question there has been is, at which entity or level do we look at? It's important to stress that the 15% drop in turnover is assessed at the level of the aid applicant, so probably the Luxembourgish company that has a business permit. Does the company have to face a drop in turnover of 15% per month or during the 3-month period? Here again, it's important to stress that it's during the 3-month period. So a company that, for example, had experienced a drop in turnover in April of let's say 10%, in May 5%, but in June it had seen a significant drop in turnover of, let's say, 50%, then the average turnover would probably still be above 15% compared to the year before, and resulting that the eligibility criteria of the drop in turnover would be fulfilled. Another frequent question refers to the existing aid schemes we have in place, such as the repayable advance or the Fonds de relance et de solidarité. It's worth stressing that if a company has already benefited from a repayable advance scheme, let's say 300,000 euros, and it now submits a project, it can only receive up to a maximum of 500,000 euros. And this is looked at the whole group. For example, if company A and company B both ask for an aid scheme, a subsidy under this new aid scheme, both undertakings can't receive each 800,000 euros, but we would have to look at the whole group level, and we are not allowed to go beyond 800,000 euros. And another question that has been asked, how to demonstrate that, or how to prove that the company is actually has actually faced a drop in turnover. As you may know, companies that have a certain turnover per year are obliged to submit a monthly VAT declaration. So these would be asked for those type of companies. And companies that are not obliged to submit those monthly VAT declarations are asked to submit basically a summary of the monthly invoices for the period we look at. Maybe another question that has come up is on the sort of aid indemnity, which has been awarded right at the beginning of the confinement of 2,500 euros and 5,000 euros. If a company has benefited under those schemes, the company does remain eligible under the existing, under this new aid scheme. And there's also no question of accumulation. Let me check whether I've missed any other question. Maybe, yeah, there's a question on the financial difficulty of a company. It's important to recall that a micro and small company, even if it could be considered as undertaking in difficulty, it can still apply as long as it's not subject to collective insolvency proceeding. So that's a very important, and it stands in contrast with medium or large undertakings who do have to respect the undertaking in difficulty criteria as set out in the EU regulation. Let me check whether there are any other questions that may be of any relevance. Oh, what about companies that have just been created? A company, for example, that has been created during the year 2019, for example, in September 2019, there, of course, we can't look at the month April, May, and June for 2019, given that the company hasn't existed at the time. There we look at the average turnover of since the creation of the company up to March, and to determine the average turnover of the company, and we then look if there has been a drop compared to the month April, May, and June 2020. In addition, it's worth stressing that if there's a startup, indeed, there's one of the eligibility criteria is to have a business permit prior. Emitted prior to the 18th of March 2020. As a result, any new startup cannot benefit under the scheme. However, there are specific aid schemes in place to help startups, and you can contact Luxinnovation or the Ministry of Economy if you're a startup and you have any specific questions for that particular aid. I think that's more or less it about for the general criteria. Once again, we'll try to answer all of the questions. If we don't manage, we will upload the answers on an FAQ on gishield.lu. I'll give the floor back to Barbara. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob, for all your answers. For your information, we needed to disable your video in the end because you were experiencing some connection problems, but there was no problem. We were able to listen to all your replies, and that's what matters. Okay, so we now move forward to the development projects block. And in this case, it will be Laurent Stock from the Ministry of Economy, the person answering these questions. So the first question regarding this topic that I see is the following. Are commissioning costs of equipment eligible if the costs are capitalized or not?
So thank you, Barbara. No, commissioning costs are not eligible. This includes everything which is necessary to test or to verify the procedures and the operation of the equipment. This is not eligible under the development project. Another question regarding the eligibility in the frame of development projects is if mobile equipment is eligible. No, mobile equipment is not eligible. It's excluded from the tangible assets. Another question relates to the replacement, if this is eligible. No, replacement of any equipment which is at end of life is not eligible for a development project. And there was also the question in how far project process diversification is covered as relates to the diversification of the production, creating new project which was not included in the portfolio of the company before. It's eligible. So this covers, I think, more or less all the development projects. So I give back the floor to Barbara.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurence. Now we're moving forward to the Circular Economy Development Project, and it will be Christian Tock from the Ministry of Economy, the person answering to the questions regarding to this block. And the first question that I read here regarding this topic is, in order to fulfill the circular economy criteria, do specific limits or thresholds have to be exceeded? Christian?
Yes. Thank you, Barbara, for the question. So there is no specific thresholds or limits that we have defined right now, because one of the principles of the circular economy is the diversity, and there is a lot of different solutions to different problems. So it's very difficult for us to define these thresholds upfront. We've seen already some of the projects coming in now, and they are very, very diverse. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the projects on a case-by-case basis. If they fulfill the definition of the circular economy that is in the legal text, then we consider that as being a circular economy, and we can give the 20% bonus. So the easiest there is really to contact us if you have a project idea, and we can quite quickly assess that, have a quick discussion whether that could potentially be a circular economy project or not. Unfortunately, it is not possible to define this upfront. There is no other questions now that I've seen except that one on the questions. So I would give back the floor to Barbara.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. Now we're moving forward to the process and organizational innovation projects. And in this case, it will be Laurence Tock again answering this block of questions. And the first one that I see here regarding this kind of aid is, how do we determine the eligible personal costs for process and organizational innovation projects?
So the personal costs are defined as a gross monthly salary, excluding any advantages or bonifications, and it's limited to really the time dedicated to the innovation process, project. So it's important to have some pointing of the hours really spent on the project. It will be afterwards the listing of the hours spent on the project, which is really considered in order to determine the personal costs. On other question was related to define the difference between an innovation process and a development project. And so here it's really important that there is a contribution of the company in time of personal investigations in order to set up the project, to make really developments and to contribute to the innovation. In comparison to the development project, there's just the acquisition of software or material which can be included in the case if it is a diversification or an extension of the production. So it's really important that there is a considerable contribution of the company in terms of personal costs, development costs, that is included in the frame of the innovation project. And another question was related if depreciation costs have to be accounted in defining the eligible costs for the investments. As for other R&D projects, one has only to account for the investment costs really dedicated to the period of the project. In this new scheme, there's a difference that all the investments which are really needed for the project, they are eligible, and there's no need to take into account any depreciation over the period of the project.
Is this all? Okay.
Yes, everything for.
All right, then we're going to move forward to the last block. It will concern the energy efficiency project or projects going beyond environmental standards, and it will be you, Laurence, answering this block as well. So the first question that we got here is this one. Are investments aimed at improving the energy efficiency of a building eligible?
Yes, the refurbishment of any existing building is eligible, but under certain conditions. So it's important that the applicant company is the owner of the building and also remains the owner of the building. Also that the works are finished within 2 years. And of course, one has to show that there's a gain in energy efficiency. So for example, replacing or increasing the insulation, replacing windows by triple glazed windows. These are all measures that are eligible. And related to this, there's also the question, what about new buildings? These are also eligible if they go beyond the standards what is required by the actual legislation. So if actually there's a certain energy performance level which is required, and if the company goes beyond these requirements, it's eligible. However, again, it has to be finished within 2 years, and the applicant company needs to be the owner. So this excludes building construction companies which are building buildings for the other proprietaries. It has really to be the own property, the building. And another question relates to the lighting systems. So if installing LED lights is eligible, yes, these are eligible as they contribute to saving in energy. Now more related to the environmental standards and going beyond environmental standards, there's the question if a company is actually not complying with the existing sailing levels, if they can benefit from a grant. In this case, they cannot benefit from a grant if they just make the investment necessary to comply with the actual standards. But if they go beyond the actual standard and also the future standard, they could benefit of an aid for this part of the investment. And then still the last question relates to again to electric cars or mobile equipment. As for the development projects, these are also excluded for the energy efficiency projects. And I think this was everything also. I give back to Barbara.
Okay, thank you, Laurence. So we've finished the Q&A section, and now we have reached the end of our webinar. I would like to thank Laurence Tock, Bob Veit, and Christian Tock for the valuable information that they have provided. And I thank you, all of you, for having followed the session. We have, in fact, right now, almost 70 participants connected. I would like to enhance that Luxinnovation team is available to provide you with all information you may need and to support you with preparing your subsidy applications. You will also find this afternoon the presentation on our website and the frequent asked questions section that I mentioned before on the Guichet.lu website. You will also receive a link to the replay of today's webinar in case you would like to review some fragment of the registration. And that's it for today. Thank you all once again, and I wish you a very nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.